Yes, Gopiji.
ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. Very warm welcome to all. I'm Gopi K, your host for today. On behalf of VHS Karnataka, very warm welcome to all the wonderful viewers for the 42nd edition of Online Samvada, brought to you by VHS Karnataka. We had 41 amazing episodes of Samvada from VHS Karnataka until now, including last Friday's enlightening session on temple economics by Sri Sandeep Singh Ji. What an enlightening session was that! Akhanda Bharata's Itihasas goes back to many yugas, and it has spread on vast land of Mars. Vedas, Puranas, Upanishads, Shastras give us true reference to Bharatiya Itihasa, our true history. In Treta Yuga, references to Ramarajya, Ayodhya, Lanka, Kishkinda, there are many references to that. In Dwapara Yuga, many references to Dwaraka Nagare, Mathura Nagare, Hastinapure, Saraswati Nadi, Ma Ganga Nadi, Sapta Sindhu Nadis. For many millennia, our ancient Gurukula later became huge universities like Takshila, Nalanda, more than 24 of them across the Bharatvarsha. In Kali Yuga, the Islamic invaders looted many of these universities, took whatever they could, and burned most of the knowledge repositories, including butchering all of the teachers, so that knowledge cannot be restored anymore. Later, the colonizers looted rest of the universities in hinterland and systematically destroyed them and uprooted the Gurukula system, which is root and essence of the Bharata. On top of that, invaders and colonizers glorified their gruesome atrocities using fake literature and narratives. One of the misrepresented narratives is Aryan Invasion Theory, AIT. To tell this truth on AIT, we have special guest speaker, Dr. Raj Vedam ji, faculty, Hindu University of America, Advisory Council, Dharma Civilization Foundation, faculty, Asha Seva Kendram. Dr. Raj Vedam holds a doctoral degree in electronics engineering and has many years of multiple disciplinary work experience in diverse industries, including power, aircraft, analog and digital electronics design automation, oil and gas industry. With several journals and conferences, papers, and patents, he is an innovation leader with strong interest in multiple areas of technologies. His current professional interests would include optimization, modeling, and machine learning. As a scientist, Dr. Raj Vedam researches the root of modern science, mathematics, and technology, whereas the Western narrative favors the origin of astronomy and maths as having originated outside India and imported into India during various invasions. Raj Vedam's multiple disciplinary studies using data from various published sources reveal otherwise. His research proposes an ancient Indian civilization that made advance in several fields of knowledge in India. Dr. Vedam believes that an evidence of based narrative of his Indian history is urgently needed to correct the grievously destroyed identity and history of Indian civilization. Towards that, he has delivered over 150 talks in various cities in India and USA, over a dozen teachers training workshops. He is a visiting faculty of Hindu University of America and, of course, uh, other courses on research findings. He has also taken the lead in reviving the correct school history textbooks in 2 states in India and in Texas and USA. So we are delighted to have a guest for tonight, one and only Dr. Subramania Swami, VHS President, 6 times Member of Parliament, and a Hindu warrior. We welcome you, Dr. Swami, for VHS Karnataka 42nd edition of Online Samvada. We are also joined by VHS National General Secretary Jagdish Shetty ji, VHS Karnataka State President Shri Nikun Shah ji, and Tejas. Over to you, Dr. Swamiji.
Thank you, Gopi ji.
or I should say Gopi K. That even sounds better. um, it's a great privilege to be here to make introductory remarks before a very renowned scholar, Dr. Raj Vedam, who is in the Hindu University, which I believe is in Florida. Am I right? Am I right? Uh,
Yes, that's correct. Yes, it's an online university now.
yeah, I know that. Um, I know the founders also from that time. Uh, so he is in a university where he is turning out students with a new mindset, because our whole problem with India today is that even though we are free of the British, the mindset he created as to who we are has not changed. And we still suffer from a vast amount of inferiority complex. We are not even clear whether we are one people, whether we come from all over the world, whether we are a byproduct of all the marauding and looting and raping that was done during, say, for the Muslim period and subsequently by the British, who also looted our resources. I've estimated $71 trillion in current prices as the amount that the British took off from India. So the most important thing is that Macaulay, who led the in the Parliament note on education on India, he said our goal is to create an Indian British in manners, British in dressing, British in morals, British in language, but uh, Indian in color. That is, whether you want to call it black, brown, uh, light black, and dark brown, whatever. But this is what he said, that everything about the Indian must be British, except that we don't accept that he is racially ours. This Aryan Invasion theory then led to a division of India also. And the South, in particular Tamil Nadu, was brainwashed to believe that their original inhabitants came from Africa. And then these from Europe, the Aryans came and drove them to the South. And that, they're being making a grievance of that. The fact is, the word Dravidian is a Sanskrit word. It's not a Tamil word. It was actually proposed and it was used for the first time by Adi Shankara when he went on his Padyatra all over the country to convert people by Shastrat. Shastrat means a debate in which if you lose, you convert to my way of living, and if I lose, then I convert to your way of living. So he challenged Buddhist scholars all along the way. And in Bihar, he met Mandana Mishra and challenged him, the greatest spokesman of Mimamsa school and the Buddhist theology, and defeated him, of course. But the first question was asked of him, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am where the three oceans meet. I am a Dravida." Well, he may have said Travid, which means three, where the three coastlines meet. So that way, Dravid is a word for region in Sanskrit. And that has been taken out to mean by the British to be a race of a people who came from outside. Aryan is an additional factor to sustain invasions of India by countries like Britain. He said they are actually Europeans, and they came across, saw the whole country of India under Dravidian rule, and beat them and pushed them to the south. So this has been the thing. There has been a lot of dilution because so much data has been coming. Before I conclude, I'd like to draw Dr. Vedam's attention. Um, to a publication in 2019 of a Indo-US group in Deccan College, which headquarters is, I think, in somewhere south, but in Pune is the research institution. And of course, I know it well because my wife's grandfather was a professor of mathematics there. So uh, I'm familiar with it. It's a very ancient, very old college, tremendous reputation. So they provided a facility for an Indo-US group to go into this question whether there's anything called Aryan, which came from abroad. And it's 2019, I'm telling you, that's late. And they published their research in a well-known journal, which is not only on dealing with the past, as past history, but it is actually a scientific magazine dealing with medicine, disease, and so on, called Cell, SCELL. And CEL has published this. And what does it say? There is no evidence whatsoever of any group which came from outside called Aryan. Arya is a word in Sanskrit, but it means a good person, a cultured person. It can be a South Indian, North Indian, East Indian, West Indian. Is a civilized person, a person of manners and so on. We call him Arya. And sometimes, the word Arya Putra has also been used quite a lot because you are still young, but you haven't reached that stage of attainment. So your parents are, your father is Arya, so Arya Putra is a common word used. So this research is a continuation of some research which has been taking the last 20 years, slowly killing the Aryan Invasion Theory in universities. But I today came here to say we need lectures like by people like Raj Vedam, and we want the masses to believe, because this has gone to the minds of the masses that there was something called Dravidian first and then Aryan, and Dravidians came from Africa, and Aryans. Skin color is not an indication of race. Skin color comes out of your pigmentation. And if you are in direct connection, directly before the sun rays, which is closer, the closer you get to the equator, the more direct the rays of the sun becomes. The pigmentation makes your skin black. And when you are up in the north, the sun rays come on an angle, and therefore they don't cause this kind of change. So skin color has got nothing to do with race. But somehow this has been built into it. It's all gone deep. It should be taken out. There's a whole political movement called Dravida Karagam. So Dravida Munnetra Karagam. And so please give this lecture and try, and if you got a tape, to play it over and over again so that it becomes part of your manthan, as they say, and you are able to repeat it here and challenge people and so on. That this is the most pernicious theory to divide India, the Aryan Dravidian theory, and therefore to say that there are people who came from abroad, and India is just a land where anybody came here and ruled here and went. So first the Aryans came, then somebody else came, then the Mughals came, and then British came. Soon the Russians can come. All this kind of justifications are built into this kind of false theory. So therefore, it should be rooted out. So my congratulations to our Karnataka unit. You're doing as well as All India, and I'm a little worried that one of these days you may declare the headquarters of the VHS in Bangalore, saying that we are doing more work than All India VHS. I'm just joking, because Jagdish is also from Karnataka. So we have already got someone who's running the show in All India level, who's Kannadiga. So not to worry. I also feel like a Kannadiga because I have a long family connections with Karnataka, and Karnataka has blazed the trail the Vijayanagaram Empire, and then so many Rajas have now, and Rani Chennamma, the lady who defeated so many forces. So in this atmosphere, imbibe what he says, and then do prachar of the same thing, and treat Aryan Dravidian theory as two poisonous words, because we are neither a race called Aryan, we are a race called Dravidian. We are Bharatiya, republic wise, and Hindu, cultural, in cultural terms. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and best of luck to all of you.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Dr.
you, Dr.
Swami. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Dr. Swami.
Thank you. So it's a real pleasure to come on the VHS platform. So thank you for this privilege once again. Deeply appreciated Dr. Swami and the organizers at VHS. So I think we have planned for a question and answer section. I'll be glad to take questions from Gopi.
Yes.
Gopi, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Vedamji. And one of the first question comes to my mind is, should it bother if the AIT, Aryan Invasion Theory, is true or false?
Excellent, excellent. So why should we bother, right? Why should we bother whether there's something called Aryan Invasion Theory or not? Well, like Dr. Swami said, this goes to the root of our identity. Who are we as a people? That's such an important question. Are we the so-called Aryans? Are we Dravidians? Are we tribals? Are we all these divisions like people are saying we are? Or what are we as a people? So the Aryan Invasion Theory is positioning Indians, at least some of us Indians, as nomads who came from Central Asia in 1500 BCE. And these illiterate nomads who did not have a script, therefore they're uncivilized, these people destroyed a superior civilization, which is Harappa. And then they were running around in India with caste, cow, and sati, and whatnot, and all these kind of things in Hinduism for the last for about 1,000 years, until the Greeks made contact with Magadha in 300 BC. From 1500 BC up to 300 BC, they say India was populated by these illiterate nomads who destroyed the civilization. So this is what they say. And then they turn around and say, you became civilized after the Greeks gave you the Brahmi script. So Brahmi script came to India along with the Greeks in a certain time frame. And you had writing only from then on. Suddenly Ashokan script and other such things. You became civilized in 300 BC. How can you have had enough time for generating knowledge in, let's say, mathematics, astronomy, medicine? It is not possible for illiterate people to suddenly get all this deep knowledge. Therefore, they say, if there is any evidence of knowledge systems in India, you must have studied it from the older civilizations like the Greeks, the Babylonians, the Chinese, the Egyptians. So that is where they discredit all of Indian knowledge, whether it is in astronomy, mathematics, medicine, everything they position as having come from outside India, because your civilization is very recent. You could not have had enough time to learn all these intricate things. So this is what it does. So Aryan invasion theory is something that has deeply distorted the identity of India, the knowledge systems of India. It has alienated us from who we are to a point where we believe that we are three people in India: Aryans, Dravidians, and tribals. So in order to address these distortions, one must go to the root of these narrations. What is this Aryan invasion theory? Where is the evidence for that? Who proved that? Who at least proposed that? So we need to go and study all of these things and see whether there's any evidence that can back up this so-called Aryan invasion theory. So to address your question, why should we bother? Well, the identity of Indians today deeply matters on this particular theory, because there are a whole lot of people going on saying we are Northern Indians, we are Southern Indians, Northern Indians are Aryans, Southern Indians are Dravidians, and this two-race theory, two-language theory, and all this nonsense that Hinduism is important to India. Southern India can reject Hinduism because we are all Dravidians and adopt Christianity or Islam or whatever. All these kind of notions come from missionaries like Caldwell and others, who have infused these ideas along with this racial divide, along with the language divide, along with so-called other divides, Aryan Dravidian divide, and so on. So critically important to study it. You cannot say it's some esoteric thing that does not matter for us in the present. It matters deeply in the present, given that we have got Dravidian parties in Tamil Nadu who go around talking this nonsense of Dravidianism and who go about advocating separatist ideas. We've also seen in a place like Sri Lanka, for example, they've had genocides. They had a civil war going on for years and years between the Sinhala people and the Tamil people, all based on the same spurious Aryan Dravidian divide. So the Singalas are supposedly the Aryans, and the Tamilians obviously think they are Dravidians. So millions of people, if not millions, at least several thousands of people were killed in the Sri Lankan civil war, and the economy was in shambles. So we've seen evidence of that. So clearly, we cannot ignore the Aryan Dravidian theory because it has got great potential for still causing a lot of problems in India. It has caused, it is causing, it will cause in the future unless we comprehensively address it and destroy it with evidence, logic, and rationality. I hope that addresses the question, Gopi.
Thank you, Dr. Vedamji.
Second question is.
Yeah.
Sorry, Gopi. You were saying something.
Yeah. Please go ahead, Nikunj.
Okay, Dr. Raj Vedam, who created this Aryan invasion theory? Why did they do so? And what evidence did they have?
Okay. Very good questions. Who created it and what evidence did they have and why did they do it? And very, very, very good questions. So if you take a look at the history of India, for example, Indians have had history through the Puranas, through the Itihasas, the Sthala Puranas, epigraphy, oral records, folk traditions. All these things have been our notion of history. Now, the Europeans, when they tried to rule India way back 1700s, they wanted to write a history of India for the purpose of their civil servants. So one of them, William Jones, when he came to India, he noticed that there is a lot of similarity between Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek. And in order to account for those similarities, they tried to, the whole field of linguistics was born right there to study languages. So they tried to propose, why are these languages related? How are the Europeans related to the Indians? Why is there a relationship between these languages? So the field of linguistics is born over there, and people try to address this whole issue. So the proposals which they came about was that there was an ancestral language called Proto-Indo-European. And from that ancestral language, they proposed that all the other daughter languages came about, whether it is European languages or Sanskrit, Persian, all these kind of things, they say came from this ancestral language. Now, the issue is there is no evidence for an ancestral language. There's no evidence for Proto-Indo-European. It is a reconstructed language in academia. And the more interesting thing is, how did they reconstruct it? In order to reconstruct it, the data used was from Sanskrit. They used something called a Swadesh list and so on, about 100 words or so with different meanings in Sanskrit, in some other language, and so on. They try to study the differences. So using the morphology of the sound, meaning how is that sound made, for example, we can say ba, ba, pa, fa. You see that words are changing. Where are we saying the word? Is the back of the mouth? Is in the middle of the mouth? Am I closing my lips to make a certain sound? Is my tongue hitting the roof to make a sound? So all these things, for example, we know from our Aksharamala, for example, ka, ka, ga, ga, na. So we know that sounds are made different ways. So studying the morphology of the sound, how the sound is made and so on, they try to propose how could one sound have morphed into another sound to a different language, So they proposed all kinds of rules in order to account for these things. Now, it is important to see that these rules do not have a logical, rational basis. It really reflected the biases of the people who are coming to say these things. And because these are studied by Eurocentric people, they came about saying that the language must have had a homeland somewhere in Central Asia, or maybe in Germany, or maybe in the Caucasus Mountains. but not in Northwest India. Initially, they thought that the ancestral language is in Northwest India, Punjab, and from there it spread to the rest of the world. Later on, because of Eurocentric reasons, they said this language must be in Central Asia. So all these rules were brought about in order to allow for a migration from Central Asia to the rest of the world, to Europe and to India. So the rules that they made are called sound laws. And these sound laws, there is no logical, rational basis for these things. It is just something proposed in order to fit a theory of what they wanted to see happen over there. That is the result. So we got this so-called linguistic model. Based on that linguistic model, they try to propose where exactly are these languages having evolved. Then in the 1800s, they found the Mitannis and the Hittites, the ruins of those civilizations in northern Iraq, southern Turkey. And they also found that the Mitanni people apparently had Vedic gods. In the peace treaties with the Hittites, the peace treaty with the Egyptians, they're invoking Indra, Ashwinis, Varuna, all these kind of deities. And they had clearly Sanskrit names for the kings, Tushrata, and names like that. So in order to address that, suddenly the theory changed. So the theory became that from Central Asia, in 3 waves, these Aryans supposed to have domesticated the wild horse. Once they domesticated the wild horse, they had iron, they had chariots, they went about conquering the world. So by 1500 BC, Aryans should have come to India, according to that theory. So that is the birth of this whole Aryan invasion theory, came about to address the European identity, who the Europeans are. Why is their language related to the Sanskrit Indian languages? What is their relationship with the Indians? In order to address these questions, this whole notion of Aryans came about, that they came into India 1500 BC. Then what happened? Late 1800s, they discovered the Mohenjo-daro Harappa ruins. Once they discovered Mohenjo-daro Harappa ruins, by late 1880s and 1800s, early 1900s, it became an invasion theory. They saw the ruins and said that there was a superior civilization over here. And this superior civilization must have been destroyed by the Aryans who came on chariots and swords. And by the way, let us read the Rig Veda. Rig Veda has got so many instances to Indra, who's Purandara, destroyer of forts. And he clearly says Indra destroyed the forts, Indra destroyed this, and the dasas and the other such things. So they read conveniently into the Rig Veda all kinds of whatever they wanted to see as invasion. And it became Aryan invasion theory into India, who destroyed the superior civilization. And the snub-nosed dasas who had thick noses and other things, they were driven to the south and they became Dravidians. That is how this theory came about. And we as modern Indians, we need to take a look at this rationally, logically, with evidence. We cannot take this as received wisdom from colonial masters and continue with this nonsense, but we need to study this with a lot of logic and rationality.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Gopi.
Dr. Vedamji, that was in the past though, but who benefits from the wrong Aryan invasion theory today?
Okay. So excellent question. So the question is that all this thing was in the past, the colonial people. Why should we bother with that today? Who is benefiting? So why are we even bothered about that? So it's critically important to understand something called historiography. Historiography is the process of who wrote the history, how was history written, what was the lens used to write history, like darshana. Darshana is a way of seeing the world, viewing the world. So what lens was used to write the history of India? What we are seeing is the historiography of India has been controlled by 5 agencies. And these agencies, I started telling you initially, were the colonial people. The colonial people, they had a darshana or a lens where they wanted to show Indians as primitive, backward, superstitious, stagnant society. And they wanted to show Britain and Europe as modern, progressive, technologically advanced, and with lots of things to teach Indians and more powerful. So they wanted to show Indian history in that manner. And we have enough evidence of history books written by various people who reflect these kind of biases, where they show Indians in a worst possible way. So the colonials came with that perspective. Wherever the colonials went, the missionaries followed them. So the missionaries had an interest to divide India on the basis of North, South, Aryan, Dravidian, and so on, because they wanted to convert the southern Indians. Let's not forget the missionaries' first activity was in southern India, all along the coastal areas and other such places. So they wanted to convert the Indians, and their whole lens was how can they write history of India in such a way that Hindus are shown as backward, primitive, superstitious, and satanic and idol worshippers, and the worst possible representation. So we are seeing people who translated the Puranas, people who translated the Itihasas into English, and all these things were done by missionaries with a certain interest in mind. Then I talked to you about the Eurocentrics. Eurocentrics are the third framework over here. So these people wanted to put a distance between the Sanskrit culture and the Europeans people. So in order to do that, they invented this Proto-Indo-European language from which they said Sanskrit has come and other such things have come. So they wanted to show great distance between them and Sanskrit, whereas the reality is they were deeply related to that. So the Eurocentric notions also came with this whole idea of white man's burden, that they are superior people, they are enlightened people, they are devout Christians, whatnot, and they wanted to show a certain way of controlling Indian history. That's a third framework. So in this whole mix, there was also the belief in 1700s, the Anglican Church of that time, they believed that God created the world in 4004 BCE. How did they come upon that date? They took the Old Testament. The Old Testament has got which prophet begat which prophet and all those kind of things. They added all the genealogies of the prophets and up to Adam and so on. And they said that it all adds up to 4004 BCE. So the Genesis, which is the creation account in the Bible, that said God created the world in 4004 BC. Further, God destroyed the world around through 2500 BC or so in Noah's flood. Noah's flood, the entire world was destroyed except Noah, his family, and the animals that took on board the ark. They are the ones that repopulated the world. So this is what they believed. They believed all the races, what they believed to be races in India, had come about from the sons of Noah. Noah's sons were Shem, Japheth, and Ham. So the white races from Japheth, the Semitic races from Shem, and the colored races from Ham. And Ham is supposed to be the cursed son of Noah. He's cursed so that all his descendants will serve the other two sons, descendants. That was a justification for Christian justification for slavery. So whenever they did slavery, they said that this is the justification for these things. So what we're seeing is a toxic mix of fundamentalist Christianity over here with superstitious ideas like this also had a great bearing in the history of India. Why is that so? Because when the Britishers came to India, they studied the Puranas, they studied the astronomy of India, and they saw great timelines. The chronology of India was going to tremendous timelines in the past, much before Noah's flood, 2300 BCE. And they asked, how is this possible? How is it possible that Indians have a chronology going back so much of time? Then they found this an astronomical significant event called the clustering of planets in Revati Nakshatra, which we identify as Kali Yuga. They found that is 3102 BCE, much before the flood event. So they took it on themselves, saying that all of Indian history is corrupted, all unreliable works. So let us go and start changing things. So the historiography came about with the biblical lens by the colonial missionaries in order to alter what they took to be the errors in Indian chronology. And they went about correcting the Indian chronology. They went about narrations of this particular nature. And like I said, the Eurocentric people, they saw this racial theory coming from the biblical notions of Ham, Japheth, and Shem. They saw the racial theory. People like Herbert Risley, they used discredited anthropological methods like craniometrics, like measuring the size of the nose, width of the nose, height of the nose, assuming that those ratios will tell you the race of the people. And they saw many races in India. So these are the kind of things. They also use this notion of caste. Indians have no idea what caste is. There is no word called caste in any Indian works. But such a notion came about when Herbert Risley, as census commissioner, he institutionalized that as the Jati Varna should be force fit into the caste. And since then, the Indian system has been utterly corrupted to where we are today. So, long answer. These are the three frameworks initially: the colonial, missionary, Eurocentric. Then you might think, all right, since 1947, India's got independence, right? We have got the freedom to change whatever we want. So, why have we not changed it? Well, in 1947, unfortunately, India's first prime minister was Nehru. And Nehru was a member of the Fabian Society. When he was educated in Britain, he was a member of the Fabian Society. Fabian Society is a socialist organization which wanted to bring about socialism in Britain. So he came about the ideas of socialism into India to try and change the Indian social dynamics according to socialist views. I'll tell you what that is in just a minute. Then, since 1972, his daughter Indira Gandhi, for political survival, she made a pact with the communists in 1972. In return, the communists only wanted the HRD sector. And Narul Hassan was the HRD minister at that time. He created and appointed the entire ecosystem of what we see today as socialist Marxist ecosystem was appointed by him. All the bodies, more than 30 to 40 social sciences bodies are created in India under his watch, and they were all populated by Marxists and socialists. And the Indian emic practitioner of Indian history was Abstract. If you had to be a vice chancellor in one of these universities or professor, you better subscribe to these notions. If you subscribe to the Indian notion of Indian history, you were thrown out. So from 1970 till today is almost 30, 50 years. In 50 years, they've completely eradicated Indian scholarship in every Indian university in India. The only people you find are the Marxists and socialists. And what is a Marxist view of history? Karl Marx, in his writings, we find out, he thought all of history is a history of class conflict. He did not see anything else in history. Everything is class conflict. This class against that class against this class. That was his view of history. He also believed that change will come on the back of a bloody revolution. He wanted to see that the old order can be destroyed by a bloody revolution, and then change will come. What is that change? A classless utopian society. That is what he envisioned, that the working class will rise against the ruling classes, destroy them, and there'll be a classless society, which is beautiful for the future. That is the essence of Marxism. Socialism believes in the same ideas, that the old order is perverted, old order is corrupted, old order should be killed in order to have a classless future. Except socialism believes it can be done by democratic means. You don't need bloody revolution. So this is the government that India has had. This is the word that Indira Gandhi inserted into the preamble during the emergency, that we are a socialist country, and we are not a socialist country, but that was inserted over there. And these are the kind of notions that have corrupted our history. So you asked, why does it matter today? Well, these five agencies: colonial, missionary, Eurocentric, socialist academia, and the Marxist. These five agencies have controlled the historiography of India.
Have we lost?
Tejas?
Yeah, there is a network issue at Raj Vedamji's side.
Okay. You can tell the viewers that we'll be back
Yeah.
in a few seconds.
I think viewers, like, we'll be back in a few minutes as soon as Dr. Vedam gets connected to the network. We experienced some technical glitches.
Which part of India is he now?
No, I think he's in the US.
I
No,
think
no.
he's in Florida, I think, Jagdishji.
Okay, he was here last week.
Not that. Is he aware?
No, he has actually dropped. So there is a network issue actually. He needs to join back actually. Gopiji, can you call him?
Yeah.
Sorry, viewers, we will be back soon.
I think before our guest comes back, I think there is few questions that we might need to look into again. One is like, who are Mitanis, who are Kassites, so, and also who are Aryan civilization. So I think maybe some of us can explore this. And a Western civilization, I think, misrepresented all these things, and also the bacteria. They're also called as Bahulika. So let's wait for our speaker to come back now, please.
Friends, before we get our speaker, Dr. Raj, back, I will just tell you a little bit of Virat Hindustan Sangam, because we are organizing all these talk shows and samvadas and discussions and Gyan Ganga and words of wisdom in the context of our mission, which we have undertaken at Virat Hindustan Sangam, the organization uh, founded by Dr. Subramaniam Swami. And as he spoke earlier, we stand for 5 of our points, which you saw in the promo at the beginning of the show. And you can always go to our website, www.vhsindia.org. You'll get all the information. The first point is, who are we? When we say we, who are we? Are we only a citizen of Bharat or citizen of India after we gained independence? That is our identity. Or are we something more than that? Are we part of the great Indian civilization? Are we something different from others? So this is what is one of our missions or visions, to explain or find out what is the real identity of an Indian. Number 2, as the topic which we are discussing today, and where Dr. Raj will be back, we are asking for the correct history of India to be projected. What is the correct history of India? Is that we were always ruled by these invaders, or is there something more glorious than that? The fact is that our people fought, our people survived, and that is why we are more than 80% Hindus today in this country. So that is the correct history of India. The third point is, we are proud of the importance of the Sanskrit language and its role in the past. It is not a dead language. It is a language by which all the Indian languages, whether it is north, south, east, west, are connected. And the West is realizing the importance of Sanskrit. Yeah, there's a school in London which popularizes the chanting of Sanskrit language. In artificial intelligence, Sanskrit is given importance. So this is the importance of the Sanskrit language. So we want to revive it, encourage it, make our youngsters understand it, study it. We may not try to impose it. I think our friend Raj Vedam is joining us. The fourth is integral humanism as a economic theory, and 5, good governance That is all aspects of Ran Rajya. These are the 5 points we talk about in our Virat Hindustan Sangam. I would request our viewers that please join Virat Hindustan Sangam. Our various units are doing great jobs. Our guest, there were some technical difficulties. He was not there, and I took this opportunity to enlighten our viewers on what is Virat Hindustan Sangam. I think Mr. Raj Vedam is about to join. So you can always go to our website, listen to our shows which are on Friday in beamed from Bangalore, which is known as Samvada, and then we have this program every Sunday 8 p.m. on our national channel of Virat Hindustan Sangam, known as Words of Wisdom, Gyan Ganga, where Dr. Swami and other speakers and a host of moderators are there who put out new ideas, current issues, history, Sanskrit, and all the topics which 5 visions or we talked about Virat Hindustan Sangam. We always discuss these programs in our Sunday show, and basic idea is to empower and educate and empower our members. We are not a political organization, but we are an organization which is out to spread knowledge and also to create leaders from our members, make them leaders, stand up and talk on those issues which we have been trying to educate our members. And our Sunday program is watched nearly in 122 countries across the globe. And most of this talk which we do on Samvada, which is from Karnataka, and in the national channel Words of Wisdom, Gyan Ganga, that is available on YouTube. You have to go to YouTube and see and search for Virat Hindustan Sangam. All our past episodes, you will get a collection of them. You can at your leisure watch them, and it is available at your leisure time. All these programs are available. We did Legal Gyan Ganga, also Legal Words of Wisdom, to educate people on the various aspects of law. Then we did Economic Gyan Ganga, and that also, those videos are available where Dr. Swami, Arvind Chaturvedi, and other guests spoke on various topics. The legal one was spoken by Dr. Professor Venkat Iyer, which we did on a Saturday. And so all these videos, which is like a university by itself, where we, I would say, spread knowledge on various aspects, especially of our great civilization, that all available on YouTube. And you can always visit it at any time, and you will have your link or watch the videos. Even in podcasts, some of these things are available where you can hear it without having the video. Audio, we can hear it, and you'll get a lot of knowledge across various subjects, political as well as social, economical, foreign affairs, and you name it. Dr. Swami's impressions of various past incidents, historical past, I would say, historical past events which have led to that event, or Dr. Swami's comment on various leaders who have since independence ruled India. All that is available on YouTube. What is it, Gopi, the latest? You are in touch with him on the phone?
Yes, sir. I think he is trying to connect, but yes.
I am on touch with him, Jagdishji. So there is some issue with his PC and net. So I'm just on call with him.
Yeah. When I mentioned to you the various aspects of good governance, Ram Rajya, we not only believe, which we strongly believe in, the reconstruction of the grand temple at Ayodhya, for which Dr. Swami fought, expedited the hearing, and the judgment of the Supreme Court came. Similar way, he is challenged the Places of Worship Act, 1991 Act, which prohibited change of any use of the existing structures. So Kashi Vishwanath Temple and Krishna Janmabhoomi was also part of it. And Dr. Swami has challenged the act in the Supreme Court, and that will pave way once the challenge is court upholds Dr. Swami's contentions that these temples where faith tells me I can worship should be not included in the Places of Worship Act 1991. Then the doors will open for the courts to hear the cases that are pending in Kashi Vishwanath Temple and also regarding Ram Janmabhoomi Temple. As you know, there are already some movements at the lower court level, that is the district court or the taluka court level, on those both issues. But Dr. Swami has last year already filed a petition which is challenging the prohibition in the act. The act prohibits anything after 15th August 1947 from being changed. So this act has been challenged. The government is the respondent. The government can come forward and say, yes, we are in support of this, or the government can come forward and say, we are also in favor of changing this act. So the ball is in the government's court. But beside this, there are other aspects of Ram Rajya, like ease of doing business. Thank you. I think Mr. Raj, welcome back, sir.
Yes, apologies.
I've been holding
Apologies. At the same time as you had a problem, my internet went out.
Okay.
So I had to
Please
restart
carry
the
on,
router.
sir.
Yes.
Can I ask a question now?
Yes, please go
Yes,
ahead.
please. Nikunj, please go ahead.
Okay. So has anybody worked on discrediting the linguistic model used to prop up AIT?
Yes, actually, the funny thing is several people have done that. And what we see is even in the British itself, there were people who were opposed to this linguistic theory, or at least calling out some issues with that. And we find the 1920s or so, it's a Britisher called Parjita, F.E. Parjita, who was a judge in India. So because he was a judge, he had the darshana of logic and rationality. Look at the evidence, look at logic, look at rationality. And he raised the correct questions. He said he made a deep study of the Puranas, he made a deep study of the Itihasas and others. He wrote a book on Indian historical tradition. And he said the evidence in the Indian text does not appear to support the Aryan invasion theory. It does not appear to support that the Aryans came from northwest part of India into India. He said the Indian texts seem to show the geography from the east to the west of India. That is what he said. And he further on talked about the chronology. He talked about the fact that there is no sacred places in the northwest part of India. If Aryans had come into India from northwest side, northwest areas must be sacred. But what we're finding is Kashi, which is in the east, that is sacred in India for the longest time. So he's calling out several paradoxes like this, and he's saying that the Indian historical tradition appears to show an east to west migration rather than a west to east migration. And he says that explains very well the Persians, how they were connected with India and other things. And he further asked the question, are that all of the Indian texts were falsified? If they were falsified to support out of India, by whom was it falsified? Who falsified that? He's asking. Who falsified it? For whose benefit? In such a long historical tradition. And in my talks, I've called out the same thing, saying that if you take a look at any Indian scholar, whether you're starting from a very, very early period of time, go to Yajnavalkya in a very early period of time, all the way down to modern writers and others, who anywhere in India is talking about Aryan invasion theory? Who is saying that we are North Indians, they are South Indians, we are two different people, we fought with these people? There is nothing in any Indian tradition, in any period of time, in any region of India, any writer, whether it is a mathematical tradition, astronomical tradition, or a religious tradition, or whatever, nobody is talking about this. They are talking about a common culture throughout India. This is the internal evidence from our own texts that we are ignoring because 200 years back, some missionaries and colonialists came and said, you're Aryans and Dravidians. We have discarded all of our internal evidence, logic, rationality, everything is thrown, and we are believing this received wisdom. This is the rottenness of today. And in our times, a couple of scholars, Srikant Thalagiri, as well as Nicholas Kazanas, they have also addressed, including others like Conrad Elst and others who have addressed the linguistic issue. And Srikant Thalagiri, for example, he continues where Parjitar left off, and he's made a deep study, and he's showing that the books of Rig Veda have got are not in order. The Mandalas 1 to 10 are order 1, 2, 3 up to 10. But some books are earlier, some books are later, and he's showing why that is so. And he's showing that of Rig Veda have got knowledge of the geography to the east of Saraswati. And the later books of Rig Veda have got knowledge of geography to the west of Saraswati. So he's again showing with evidence how the Rig Veda books are showing knowledge east to west. And he's made a deeper study in various other areas. Look at the chronology of the king list. He's looking at king list in the Mitanni culture, Hittite culture, and he's talking about the antiquity of those people. He's calling out paradoxes. According to Srikant Thalagiri, he says, if the homeland of the Proto-Indo-European language is situated in India, in Northwest India, then he says, I'll accept some of the things from the linguistic analysis. If you locate the homeland in Central Asia, and he's saying a lot of logical problems are there, evidence does not support it, and so on. If you locate it here, it becomes consistent. If you locate it in Central Asia, it becomes inconsistent. So that is Srikant Thalagiri. He's written a couple of good books on that. I recommend reading his books, watching his videos. The other person is Nicholas Kazanas. Kazanas, he studied the deities, the Vedic deities, the old European deities, Scandinavian, Norse, Germanic, and others. And he made a comparative study of the stories that are there and so on and so forth. And he came to the conclusion that if there is a common Proto-Indo-European language, it is so far in the past, it is so remote that there is no data available today to reconstruct that PIE language. So in his opinion, he said, all the papers dealing with reconstructing PIE are worthless. He just called it nonsense. So there are people like this who have studied the linguistic model, they rebutted it, and so on. Today, the thinking is India is a linguistic area, a Sprackbund. So meaning that is a place where several languages co-evolved in India, rather than the model being we have different languages in India because of invasion. Instead of that idea, the idea today is that languages co-evolved in India. And where is the root for these languages? It is so far in the past that we cannot even understand what the common language would have been. We cannot even imagine 20,000 years ago what was the language spoken by the humans who lived in India. 30,000 years ago, what was the language? We cannot say they were grunting. We know that is not true because we have had the ability to speak through a gene called FOXP2. FOXP2 was a gene that came in modern humans, maybe going back in the record about 200,000 years ago. So we know we have the ability to speak for a very long time. There must have been some language. What is that language? We don't know. But we know a lot from the archaeology, from genetics and others, that India has been populated for a very, very long period of time. So one can imagine that if there is a proto-language that's common, there has been regional divergences over a long period of time. So this is the modern way of looking at the linguistic in India. If there are different languages and so on, so linguistic area is fragment where languages have co-evolved for a long period of time. Co-evolution happens because contact happens between people, because of trade, because of the civilization, because of mixing, commerce, a whole lot of things, pilgrimages, people go from one point to another. So these are the reasons why people mix. And obviously migrations also. If there's a drought in some place, you migrate to some place in the north, south, whatever. So these are the reasons. So your question was, are there people who have contested these theories? And I said, yes, there are. From Parjitar, for example, who called out some of the inconsistencies, the linguistic Aryan invasion theory model, to Srikant Thalagiri, who studied, called out some of them, Nicholas Kazana, Conrad Elst, several other people.
Thank you for that. Before that, I think Jagdish would like. I think Jagdish has some work. I think he has to leave by 9 o'clock, so he'll be leaving now. So he was just. I think he left just now, I believe.
Right.
So can we, Nikunj, can we continue the questions because we got an interruption? We'll continue for a while. There are a few more questions to clarify.
Sure. Yes.
Thank you. With your permission, we'll continue, Dr. Vedam.
Yes, please go ahead.
Today there are people saying
okay, Nikunj, okay. Today there are people saying genetically, like genetics proves AAT. So, is it really proves AAT or like just one more theory? Is it true?
Okay. So genetics is the latest battleground, the latest tools people are using to address the question of who are we as a people? Where did we come from? So one has got to go into the methodology itself, because if we are rational people, logical people, then we have to look at methodology. What are the tools you're bringing in, and what is the capability of the tool? What are the assumptions in that tool, and so on. We have to study those things. Genetics tries to position that differences in the human genome tell a story of migrations. That is the underlying assumption in many of the genetic studies. Why should there be differences? That's the next question. Because if we are humans, it's because in our DNA, we got 22 autosomes and one pair of gender chromosomes. That is what makes us human. And the fact that in these, we have many, many genes, and the DNA is composed of amino acids. There are 4 of them, A, C, T, G, and they appear in something called base pairs. And we have an estimated 3 billion. That is what makes us human. For example, if you take a chimpanzee or you take a parrot or you take a dog or something like that, their DNA is different. The number of chromosomes they have, everything is different. That is what makes us different from animals. So ideally, all humans must have the same DNA. Ideally. Then we'd all be clones of each other, literally, if we had the same DNA. But what happens is during the process of meiosis, when you have the genetic content from the male and female mixing and making a zygote and other things. So during that process of meiosis, what happens is sometimes there are copy errors. When the chromosomes are being copied, crossed over, and a new pair has been formed, there are copy errors. Typically, this meiosis is a ability for the organism to correct errors in the chromosomes. But here, sometimes copy errors can happen. Sometimes one segment of the chromosome can be left out. Sometimes one segment can be inverted. Sometimes a segment of the chromosome from here is copied to some other chromosome. All these kind of copy errors can happen. And these copy errors can be lasting effect or sometimes just noise and so on. But eventually, we have come to recognize these as mutations. These are mutations that happen during the meiosis process. And if a mutation happens in some lineage, let us say, 100,000 years ago, somebody got a mutation, call it A. Then his descendants will also have that same mutation going forward down there. Then if there is some other lineage 50,000 years ago, somebody with mutation A introduces a new mutation B. So that means the descendants of B are going to have A and B, whereas the descendants of A will have only A. So this way, the differences in the genome can tell the story of migrations. So therein was born the field of ancestral DNA study. Since 19 study, how did we come about? Initially, because it was so expensive to study the chromosomes, the DNA, and so on. Remember, the human genome was not even decoded those days. Very, very expensive to do it. Only universities and research labs could do it. And they studied the gender chromosomes, the female maternal mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome. They look at mutations over there and they try to tell a story of migrations. In that story, what we learned, early studies, is that the modern Homo sapien came about 250,000 years ago. I'll tell you how these estimates were made. About 250,000 years ago, and about 90,000 years ago, a group of them left Africa. This origin was in Africa, by the way, and they left Africa and they crossed the coastal area, came into India around 90 to 70,000 years ago all the way through the triangular part of India, going up to Sumatra and so on. So the mtDNA and the Y chromosomal studies says that the early, as far as the mtDNA is concerned, all the early lineages were in Africa. Out of Africa, the lineages are M and N lineages, which are in South Asia, which is basically India. And then from India, we are seeing the rest of the population of the world. So they said all the non-African people of the world have been populated from the Indian region, from this M and N in the maternal mitochondria, and on the Y chromosome, something called F, G, H, I, J, K, L. All of those are lineages in India, and the remaining things have gone from India, they have populated the rest of the world. So this is the early studies done, which showed that out of Africa, it was into India. It is from India that the rest of the world is populated. Frame we are talking about 70,000 to around 20,000 years ago. This is when these migrations happened to the rest of the world. So some people said, well, what is the composition of today's Indians? In today's Indians, can we figure out their genetic content? And many studies have been done from different parts of India. So they do the genetic distance, something called genetic distance, through something called fixation index, FST. What is it, FST? FST, it says that if I have a bunch of mutations I'm interested in the human body, let's say they've taken in the Y chromosome or the mtDNA some mutations of interest, then they go about seeing the distance. If there's somebody from northern India, southern India, eastern India, do you have the same mutations? What is the distance? They have a mathematical measure to compute that. And the studies that came are very surprising, whether it's from northern India, southern India, eastern, western, across the so-called Jati Varnas, across the linguistic boundaries and everything, the numbers are the same. The numbers do not show that the FST for northern Indian is completely different from FST for southern Indian. That mathematical measure is the same. There is no difference. Everybody's got the same range of values we have. So what it is saying is that today's Indians, there is no genetic differentiation into the Chaturvarna system or into the so-called language category or into northern, southern, and other such things. A few differences exist in one or two mutations. I've called it out in my talks. There are maybe one or two across the many mutations, just one or two haplogroups, they're slightly different. So this is the reality from FST. So I talked about initially the mtDNA, talked about Y chromosome. Now I talked about FST of the modern Indians. Then there are people who came about saying that, look, we are seeing that there is something called RNA in the Y chromosomal haplogroups. And this R1A has got a counterpart called R1B, which is there in Scandinavian countries mostly. R1A is mostly in the Asian areas. And they said R1A probably is a language gene. This is the one that came from Central Asia into India, and therefore this is a language gene. So people studied R1A. Where did R1A originate? Many people studied this until 2010 or so. The debates were going on. So some people said it appeared in Central Asia. Some people said it appeared in India, and so on. Then the majority of the people still say that R1A originated around 20,000 or 30,000 years ago, according to the work of Underhill. And it happened in Indian region. It originated in India, and it went out other parts of the world. So they said, all right, let us look at high resolution R1A data, meaning not only you look at the mutation R1A, but look at further lineages over there. So they went to something called R1A Z93 to try and say, if you look at the really high resolution data, they say R1A Z93 came into the record around 5,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago, closer to the so-called Aryan Invasion Theory. So let us see where that came from. So we are seeing over there, different studies are giving different answers. David Reich, for example, Harvard Medical School, he says it came into the record around 4,000 years ago. But if you see Lucot, who's another French professor, he said R1A Z93 has got a common ancestor with Central Asia going back almost 15,000 years. So one study is saying the common ancestor is 15,000 years ago. Harvard is saying the common ancestor is 4,000 years ago. If you have two different answers, what are you going to do? Are you blindly going to say pedigree is important, Harvard is good, I'll go with Harvard? Or are you going to say, why these errors? Both are covered the same population. or same data, why are there problems? One has got to go deeper and deeper. What we see is many of these ancestral studies are doing studies called admixture or principal component analysis methods. And in these are mathematical methods that have got a lot of assumptions built into the mathematical means. So they have constraints for number of generations, for example. These constraints come from linguistic analysis. If they want to prove that R1A Z93 came from Central Asia into India, along with the so-called Aryan Invasion Theory, they'll try to restrict the time frame to around 4,000 years, because 1500 BC is when it happened. So they say time limit is 2000 BC till 1500 BC. In this time frame, we want to see the signal. So those are the kind of studies that came about. Then later on, we saw that David Reich came about with what they called the genome-wide studies, saying that not only will I see the maternal mitochondrial DNA or the Y chromosome, but we have 22 autosomes. We look at the mutations in autosomes also to see if it is telling us a story. Problem is, ancient specimens, you can't recover genome-wide data. So they went about reconstructing that ancient DNA by various means, averaging today's DNA is used, chimpanzee DNA is used to fill in the blanks to make an ancient sample. Anyway, the same kind of methods have been used. Models were proposed in order to describe the Indian DNA. And they came about with an idea. It is an idea, mind you. It's a model and an idea that there's something called ancestral North Indian and ancestral South Indian. 2013, they came out with a paper like this, saying that if we take these as proxies of ancient DNA, ANI and ASI, we can talk about how our present-day Indians related to these two poles, the ANI and ASI. The problem is ANI has no evidence that any such thing existed. These are mathematical suppositions and mathematical understandings trying to fit the data to some mathematical analysis. And I know as a mathematician, you can fit anything you want. If you have a model and data, whatever you want to show, there are ways to make it fit and show you that that's what it is. So one has got to use logic, rationality, understanding. So David Reich's group came out in 2018 saying that Iranian pastoralists came into India in 7000 BCE. And around 2000 BC, from Central Asia, this linguistic analysis, people came into India in this time frame. So this is his take in this time frame. At that time, I criticized this paper in several of my talks in 2018 and 19, saying that where in your data are you showing evidence of out of India? Whether you take the Matsya Purana or the Brahmanda Purana or the Rig Veda, everything is talking about Dasaragnya, the Drihyu who leave India and go out of India and populate other areas. And where is that shown in your signals? Should I discard my entire history of my people who written these Itihasas and Puranas just because you come with a paper from Harvard? I don't think so. There's a problem over here. Also, in climate studies, we know that 2000 BCE, there was a monsoon failure for 200 years. 200-year monsoon failure in India led to the collapse of Harappa. It also led to people migrating out of India to the Fertile Crescent. Fertile Crescent means where the Tigris, the Nile, and Euphrates, in that river valleys, people migrated out there with their cattle. And we have got evidence through cattle genomics. We got other evidence and so on, through knowledge systems and so on. We have these evidences. I said, where do those things show in your data? So I said, there's a problem. There's a red flag that has gone up because there is some data that cannot be described by the results. Well, in 2019, David Reich came out with another paper in Science, along with Vagesh Narasimhan, that they used additionally about 10 or 11 samples of people in Iran who were supposedly in cultural contact with Indus Valley, and they wanted to see what does the results say now. And now they went back on their earlier results. Earlier, they said Iranian pastoralists came to India in 7000 BC and became the ASI, ANI, all this nonsense. And now they went back and retracted that whole thing, saying, no, there's no evidence of that because that mathematical model is converging to a different answer. This is what I said in 2018. I said, if you give me a mathematical model, I will ask the obvious questions. How sensitive is your result to the data that you have put into it? If I take a few pieces of data out, will your result converge to the same answer? In other words, is your result strongly dependent on a certain data that you put in over there? I called out the issues with PCA analysis. The fact that you can load your matrix in such a way that you can show whatever gradient you want, depending on the composition of the data, the population you selected, the size, and other such things. So I called out several issues over there. And I said, in sensitivity analysis, if you put fresh data over there, and will you still converge to the same answer? I called out several problems in the SQP analysis. SQP is sequential quadratic programming. That is the method used to connect ancient samples to present samples using admixture. That is a mathematical method used. Got 101 assumptions in it, 101 tuning factors in it to make you converge to what you want. Just like I predicted, when they put these 11 new samples from Iran, their mathematical models now converge to a different answer. And the different answer does not allow Aryans to come into India in 7000 BCE. So there you are. Different data you put in, your model is going somewhere else. So what can you have in the models that you're publishing and proposing? So clearly, we have to put a logical, evidence-based analysis with rationality over here and say we have a problem. So anyway, so the bottom line is that once these results came, David Reich has showed these kind of issues over there. The same period of time, they were also working in what Dr. Swami said earlier, in the Harappa sample. They were trying to take the Harappa DNA. It was very difficult to obtain workable DNA from that. About 5-6 attempts were made from the skeletons over there. Eventually, they got some sample, which apparently is a woman's sample, which means there's no Y chromosomal input into that. So anyway, they analyzed this sample in a lab in Korea, and Vasant Shinde, Neeraj Rai, David Reich, and others published this paper in Cell. And in that paper, what they've said is, it looks like India has got an independent lineage, which they call Indus Valley Cline, meaning this is a grouping for the Indus, for the people of India. In that, they proposed 15% has got a mix from Andamanis. And this really is a remnant of Patterson's model in David Reich's group earlier. I don't even understand how they would put in present day genomics trying to do this. But anyway, this is related to the very ancient migrations, 50,000 years ago, like I said, out of Africa, going into Andamanese areas and others. It's related to that migration. Anyway, that model is saying that if you take Indians as mostly 85% Indus Valley Cline, 15% Andamanese, then they're showing with time in Iranian hunter-gatherers, in Iranian pastoralists, most of their DNA is from Indus Valley Cline. As you go further and further down the time, maybe to 4000 BC, 3000 BC, we are seeing that the Iranians have a little bit of Anatolian input. Anatolia means Turkey. From that side, they have a little bit of input, 20% or so. So Vasant Shinde and Neeraj Rai's paper is showing it is an out-of-India migration even in this time frame. In 10,000 BCE going down to 4000 BC, it is out of India going into these time frames. So what we are seeing in genetics, this is where we are as of today with this Neeraj Rai's paper and others. So I talked to you in genetics about early on the mtDNA, Y chromosomal differences that is talking that ancient migrations are out of India. The non-African people of the world are populated from India. From there, I went to FST. FST is a fixation index that is for present day Indians, what is genetic makeup? Can we be stratified as Aryans, Dravidians, Brahmins, Shudras, and all these things? That's all utter nonsense. The genetics of today's Indians using FST index is showing a uniform FST throughout India, literally, with very, very small variations. So you cannot see that today. Then I went to R1A. When people said R1A is the language gene in the 2000s and so on, then people looked into high resolution R1A Z93. I talked about 2 different studies giving 2 different answers. I explained why, because these are mathematical studies. Then I talked about genome-wide, how David Reich came with one result in 2018. They retracted that, went back and said in 2019, something else has come about. Harappa now showing that Indus Valley Cline going out over here. So the bottom line is genetic results must be scrutinized very carefully. You must see what is the data they've used, what is the methodology they've used, and can the claims follow from the methodology data that they have provided. One has got to do that diligence. In genetic studies, one can only make narrow claims, very, very narrow claims, that given the limited number of samples they've studied, given the methodology and assumptions, they can put forward a small claim. You cannot make a claim that covers the entire civilization, saying that, yeah, now we got this Aryan invasion, things like that. That is nonsense. When you see that clearly, red flags must go up, and you must say, no, I don't think it's possible with what the data that you have. Long answer, but it's important to address that. So I think the state of art in genetics, if you look at the Harappa results from Neeraj Rai and from Vasant Shinde, it is still talking about out of India. Whereas David Reich is still holding on to 2000 BC. There is a language input into India via the Aryans. They're still holding on to that. And I'm calling out the methodology, saying that there are a lot of issues with that methodology, with the statistics they've used, with the methods they've used. There are some issues over there. Okay, back to you. I can't hear you. Are you on mute?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Thank you, Vedamji. I think Nikunji, please go ahead.
What other evidence is there to discredit Aryan invasion theory?
Oh, so there is a lot of evidence to discredit it. Like I said, if you just apply our common sense, if you take just our texts, the vast majority of texts that we have, writers, different parts, whether it's in Sanskrit or Kannada or Tamil or whatever, go back to as far as you want, look at the epigraphy, there is no evidence of two people. There's no evidence of Aryan invasion. There is no invasion evidence of any war or migration of millions of people to India. Nothing is present in the Indian text. Rather, it talks about a common culture. So that is the first common sense evidence that is staring at us in our face, but we don't admit it because our minds are being blocked out by a deracination. So that's the first one. Then if you evidence for example, iron. People say that iron came into India via the Aryans. That the Aryans had got iron in Central Asia. They made the chariot, domesticated the horse, and they came on chariots to India. And the iron sword is better than the bronze sword that Indians had, and therefore they subdued India. This is the kind of thinking that Iron Age was brought into India by the Aryans. But the evidence is showing something else. We know in Karnataka, for example, today in Kudremukh, if you go, or Bhadravati and places like that, in Bellary and places like that, we know that iron has been there for a long time. Iron ore has been there for a very, very long time. In 2018, there was a Japanese professor, I forget his name, he published a paper showing where are the archaeological finds in India of iron. And he's showing that all over southern India, we have got very, very ancient iron samples. For example, one of the oldest one we have found is from Gachibowli in University of Hyderabad campus, where Professor K.P. Rao, they found in an archaeological expedition on the grounds of the university, they found knives, blades, and other things made of iron, which they optical simulated luminescence and other methods, they tried to date it. And they said the date ranges from 2400 BC all the way to 1800 BC. What does that tell us? That tells us that iron is there in southern India much before the so-called Aryan invasion theory. Aryan invasion is supposed to be 1500 BCE, but this is at least 600, 800 years before that, we got evidence of this. Similarly, several other archaeological finds have been made in southern India showing that Iron Age was in India at least by 2400 BCE. And we are also seeing evidence of this technology moving northwards. The archaeological finds in the north have been more recent than the south. Also finding evidence that some of the most recent ones are in Punjab and areas like that, around 1200 BC and so on. So if Aryans came to India in 1500 BC, we expect that iron must come from northwest India into southern India. That evidence is not there. Archaeology is showing the other way around, completely other way around. So iron is one big issue. Second is the Saraswati River. Now the problem with Saraswati River is that the Rig Veda is talking about a mighty Saraswati River flowing from the Himalayas to the oceans. It's talking about that, as if they are seeing a mighty, huge river flowing. Several verses are there in Rig Veda talking about Saraswati River. Now, according to Max Muller and linguistic analysis, the Rig Veda was composed in 1200 BCE. After the Aryans came to India, 1200 BC onwards, Rig Veda has been composed in India. It has been composed and so on. The problem is climatology and hydrology is telling us that the Saraswati River perhaps dried out by 1900 BCE. So the evidence, for example, is a paper that came out in 2019, Sirkar and others, Anirban Sirkar and others, who have talked about the existence of a perennial flowing river in the Harappan heartland. What it means is that they said that they found evidence for a river from the Himalayan region all the way 300 miles or kilometers up to the Pakistan border, a wide river based upon analyzing the sand, the mica in the sand and other things. By analyzing that, they've made these claims. And further, they said their evidence is showing this river was flowing throughout the year in two time periods. One time period is 80,000 to 20,000 years ago. This river was flowing. There is evidence of that. Then it dried up. Then the second phase is 9,000 years till 4,000 years ago. Again, 4,000 years ago, they're saying there is evidence of the Saraswati River as a flowing river. That means Aryans who have come to India in 1500 BC could not have seen the Saraswati River because we know it already dried up. We know it already dried up. There were tectonic movements in the Himalayan region that caused the Sutlej. Sutlej was feeding into the Saraswati River, but because of tectonic movements, Sutlej now feeds into the Indus. That is what is happening. That's one of the reasons why Saraswati went dry and went underground literally. So we know these facts. So how could the Aryans have come to India in 1500 BCE, composed the Rig Veda in 1200 BCE, and talked about a Saraswati River which they have not seen? So clearly we have a problem over there if you consider hydrology, the facts from hydrology. Well, the Marxists and the leftists are very good at changing the goalpost. So the minute these evidences were brought about, along with satellite imagery showing the paleo channels and so on, they changed the goalpost by saying that, no, the Saraswati River was something in Afghanistan's Haraswati or something like that, which they had encountered on their way to India. So this is their position. But clearly, this is utter nonsense given the facts over here. We know this. So we talked about Aryan, we talked about Saraswati. Then the third one. We are seeing in Science as a paper in 2019, I forget the name of the authors, none of them are Indians, by the way. So they talk about cattle genomics, how in the Fertile Crescent means where the Mitannis were living, where the Hittites were living, and all these people around 2000 BC and so on. They're saying suddenly the incidence of Bos indicus means the familiar humped bull that we see in India. Even today, you go to India, you see the humped bull or the bullock carts and everything, right? It's very, very unique. The zebu, it's called zebu. This Indian cattle is resistant because it is adapted to the arid conditions in India. These cattle, suddenly the prevalence of this went up in around 2200 BCE, in around 1800 BCE in this area of the world. And they are saying it came there because of a multi-century drought in India. Multi-century drought in India caused a migration, and these people from Indus Valley have come here along with their cattle and settled here. That evidence is there. That evidence is there also in Akkadian seals. If you see, the Akkadians are people who lived in Iraq, that area. Yeah. The Akkadian seal in Louvre Museum in Paris, that is still showing the Indian longhorn, the buffalo, the humped bull, how that is very important in their culture. Remember, in the old days, a measure of wealth is cattle. If your cattle can survive the drought, that is where you're wealthy and powerful. So it is very, very important, this Indian buffalo coming there, arid adapted more. So we are seeing that. Then there are some people who are saying that agriculture came from outside India into India. But the works from Professor Thakur Singh and others from published in Current Science in 2018, that is showing that paddy was grown in Lahura Deva's lake sediment in the Ganga plain, going back to what they call the Holocene era. And if you read the paper, it is saying that around 9,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago, there's evidence of rice being grown in Ganga plain itself. So clearly, we are also seeing evidence of paddy and other things grown in India for a very long time. Then you take a look at mouse genomics. There is a professor who's talking about the ancestor of the mice. Where did the ancestor of the mice originate? And he's saying that the ancestor of the house mice appears to be in India. It is from India that the common house mice has gone to Africa, Madagascar, Central Asia, Europe, Southeast Asia, all these places. And this might went along with humans. Wherever humans went, mice would also go with them because mice follows where agriculture is. If you store paddy in your storeroom, mice will come over there. We know that. So wherever this technology went out, it looks like mice also went. So by looking at cattle genomics, mice genomics, evidence of paddy, evidence of Saraswati, evidence of Iron Age, many data points are there like this. And Dr. Premendra Priyadarshi has written a lot about agriculture, origin of agriculture, others in his books. So we have enormous amount of evidence that is talking to us about how the Aryan invasion theory does not fit this evidence. Rather, if it is an out of India, the evidence is certainly present over there. So I hope that addresses at least some evidence that you asked for.
Thank you. And what is the timeline? I mean, we're running out of time. Like, could we continue or like?
I am okay because we delayed it a bit. I'm okay with continuing it.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Vedamji. And according to your research, then India is an ancient civilization. That's what your research says. And what evidence do you have for its antiquity?
Okay. Evidence for India's antiquity. Right. So you correctly said, if we demolish this Aryan invasion theory, then this 1500 BC constraint goes away. If the 1500 BC constraint goes away, now we can logically and rationally try to explore how ancient is the Indian civilization. And there are many ways to do that. And like I've talked about, for example, archaeological finds, paleontological finds. We know that, for example, the Narmada skull. The Narmada skull was found in the Narmada River Valley in 1982 by the GSI, Geological Survey of India. So a researcher found that that skull has been dated to 350,000 years ago, 150,000 years ago. An American bone specialist called Kenneth Kennedy, he studied that skull and he said the cranial capacity appears to be 1400 cubic centimeters. That is close to the modern human. So some people said maybe this is Homo erectus, but Homo erectus is supposed to have died out by 600,000 years ago. Also, Homo erectus, the cranial capacity average in Southeast Asia, Africa is 1000 cc. Whereas this is clearly closer to modern humans. So people questioned who are the people who were living in India about 350,000 years ago. Then from Shanti Papu and other researchers, there was a paper some time back saying that in Athirampakam is in Tamil Nadu, they uncovered stone tools, variety of specialized stone tools showing evidence of superior cranial capacity. People who have planned these tools must have been capable of abstract thought by making one tool for javelins, one tool for arrowhead, one tool for cutting the skin, one tool for scraping the flesh. So all these kind of different tools calls for planning, understanding, and such things. And these are associated with humans. Humans are associated with modern Homo sapiens, associated with this abstract thinking capability. These stone tools have been dated to about 185,000 years to about 200 to 300,000 years ago in Tamil Nadu. So we have got evidence from archaeology, paleontology showing that India had an ancient species of Homo sapiens living in India before the so-called African influx about 70,000 years ago, which is what mtDNA is telling us. Before that, there were already Homo sapiens living in India. Some people have tried to address this question by saying these are the samples of people called Denisovans. Denisovans are now known to be one more kind of species of Homo sapiens who were there remains of Denisova in a place called Denisova in Siberia. That's why the name Denisovans. But now there is a lot of research going. What was the extent? Where did they live? A lot of research is going on that these days. So probably the samples living in India in that time frame could have been Denisovans who were living in India. That's what we know. Pretty ancient. That is the bottom line. Then you go to other archaeological finds from 70,000 years to the present time, all over India, wherever you go, we are finding evidence, either stone tools or cave drawings and other such things. Or if you go to Karnataka itself, you're seeing megalith cultures in Karnataka and other places. So we know that India has been populated continuously over a long period of time by people. Then if you look at what Professor S.M. Ramaswamy from Bharatidasan University, he just published a couple of years ago some paper after years of research in Pumpuhar. Pumpuhar today we think was the port city of the Cholas Empire, which is in the coastal city in Tamil Nadu today. But he says the old Pumpuhar was 25 kilometers into the Bay of Bengal, not on land. 25 kilometers Bay of Bengal, 200 meters down, or about 145 meters down, 125 meters down. And he's showing that corresponded with the shoreline 18,000 years ago. 18,000 years ago, the world was going through an ice age called late glacial maximum. During that late glacial maximum, most of the water was locked up in ice, and the seashore was far beyond where it is today. And he's showing human settlements and activity in the Bay of Bengal in that area going back 15,000 years ago. So clearly, we have evidence of a maritime culture in southern India going back to that time frame. If you go to Dwaraka, in Dwaraka, the CSIR lab 2003 that there is evidence of what appears to be a sea wall, some kind of a wall that is running for 9 kilometers long, that they don't think is artificial but perhaps man-made. And they also found a piece of wood which they carbon dated to around 9,000 years before present in the area of Dwaraka, where Dwaraka is right now. Then if you look at carbon dating, if there is a lot of carbon dating done in Meghar, in Dhana, Rakigadi, and other places. These carbon datings are showing settlements around 9,000 years before present, 8,000 years before present. So clearly we have got in northwest part of India, in the coastal parts of India, all over India, we have settlements, evidence in carbon dating, artifacts, all these things are available. Then if you go to even more recent times, I'm calling it recent, Harappa is recent for me, 3000 BC onwards, we are finding in Harappa, we are finding in Kiradi in the south, in Pattanam, Arikamedam, so many places we are finding artifacts. So clearly, India has been occupied for a long period of time. So one more evidence of antiquities over there. Then if you take a look at the evidence from the texts, astronomy, for example, the Indian astronomy is unique in that it has got a nakshatra model, and all of the celestial calendar and observations are made with respect to the nakshatras. I have shown extensively in my talks how by evidence of ancient measurements preserve the nakshatras. We can use a phenomenon called precession of equinox to try and date when that observation might have been made. The precession is a phenomenon where the Earth is wobbling about where it is pointing to. The axis of rotation in Houston is around 29 degrees latitude. If you look at the sky, and northern sky is that side for me, 29 degrees, you look at that, that's where the pole star is, what we call Dhruva. Earth appears to be rotating about that point, the northern hemisphere. Bangalore is 19 degrees latitude. So if you look at the northern hemisphere, 19 degrees in the sky, you'll find that Polaris is over there, and Earth appears to be rotating about that. If you go to Jaffna or maybe go to Gale in the southern part of Sri Lanka, closer to the equator, it is almost at 0 degrees. Earth appears to be rotating, lying down literally on the ground. Earth is rotating about that. If you go to Alaska or the North Pole, directly overhead, 90 degrees above you, Earth appears to be rotating over there. But where the axis of rotation is, that is slowly changing in the sky. In fact, it is tracing a circle which is about 26,000 years to finish that circle. Because of that, where a nakshatra is at the vernal equinox point or the winter solstice or the summer solstice, that will keep changing. Over thousands of years, one can make out it's changed a lot. So Indian texts have got several measurements preserved in them. One of them is in the Vedanga Jyotisha. Vedanga Jyotisha is talking about winter solstice at the Dhanishta Nakshatra. Winter solstice in the Dhanishta Nakshatra can be dated to 1400 BCE. That's a very, very long period of time in the past. Yagnivalkya in Shatapatha Brahmana, he's talking about how the Kritika Nakshatra never moves from the east direction. That is a reference to Kritika being on the celestial equator. And we know Kritika was on the celestial equator in 2982 BCE, almost 3000 BCE. That is when Kritika was on celestial equator. That is a time frame for Yagnivalkya. Now, Yagnivalkya Shatapatha Brahmana is a Vedic concept. How can that be present in 3000 BCE? Then in all our texts, including today, most of the devout Hindus, when they do their prayers, they'll say how much of time has elapsed from Kali Yuga onwards, Kali Yuga till where they are. Their prayers will include that. This Kali Yuga phenomena has various places. Epigraphy, which Dr. M.L. Raja has called out in his recent book, how much of epigraphy is there in southern India, northern India, calling out his Kali Yuga time frame. Aryabhatta is talking about it, Surya Siddhanta is talking about it, and various other calendrical systems that we have that talk about it. It turns out to be a planet clustering in the Revati Nakshatra. That planet clustering we can simulate in the planetarium software. It comes out to 3102 BCE. Staggering amount of time. That is what caused a lot of agony for the Christians, the missionaries who came, who said, how can India have something that is so old? They also studied it. They also studied this phenomena. They knew 3102 BC is there. February 18th, 3102 BC is when the planets clustered at the midnight of that. So they questioned, how can Indians have such an ancient observation? That's what caused several other problems. Then you go to other astronomical phenomena. There are many of them. I'll just call out one or two of them. One of them is about the Aditi phenomena. In Aitreya Brahmana, there is a statement that the Devatas did not know when to observe the Yajna, because in India, all the celestial calendar was based on the nakshatras. So vernal equinox is the beginning of the new year. At vernal equinox, a certain nakshatra is supposed to be there. But over time, because of precision, that nakshatra had changed. So they did not know when to do the yajnas. They did not know when to observe the festivals. So Aitreya Brahmana is saying the Devatas went to Aditi and asked her, we don't know where the yajna has gone. Can you help us find it? Aditi is saying, I'll help you, but I want a boon from you. And they say, ask the boon. And she says, all yajnas will begin and end with me. Meaning that she's saying the year of Aditi, the vernal equinox will begin with Aditi and end with Aditi when the solar year is over. So this turns out to be, Aditi is the nakshatra that we call Punarvashu. Punarvashu has got two stars. One is Diti, other is Aditi. Diti and Aditi were the wives of Kashyapa. If you remember, they gave rise to the Vasus and the Devas and others. So we know about that. So in the Greek tradition, this is called Castor and Pollux. Castor and Pollux are Diti and Aditi. Punarvashu was at the vernal equinox position in 6000 BCE. Are you with me? 6000 BCE is more than 7,000 years ago. That is when our ancient Indians did not know how to do the yajna, Vedic sacrifice. They did not know when to do that. And they're saying they reset the Vedic calendar to Aditi, Punarvashu Nakshatra. That is there in Aitreya Brahmana. Then if you go further, there are the phenomenon of Ashwinis. Ashwini phenomena can be decoded as winter happening in the Ashwini, winter solstice in the Ashwini Nakshatra, based on the story that we know, Sanjana, Surya, Chaya. We know that story. Everybody's heard about that from Rig Veda. That can be dated to 7200 BCE. So similarly, there are many other observations in Indian astronomy that goes to further and further ancient dates. One or two dates, I'll say coincidence or whatever. But when you have so many dates happening, you must ask, how is it that Indian texts have got encoding of these ancient dates? Did somebody manufacture these dates? If so, why? How could they have done it? How could they have had the mathematics and the precise knowledge of planetary orbital dynamics to understand how to backdate some of these things? How did they do these things? So there are some logical questions we can answer, and the rational answer is these eyewitness observations of people in that period of time and encoded in memory over time. And that is why we have the antiquity that we are seeing today. So clearly, to answer your question, Gopi, there is a lot of evidence of antiquity, whether it is in archaeology, whether it is in paleontology, whether it is in genetics that is talking about ancient people in India for a long period of time, whether it is the artifacts I talked about, whether it is the cattle genomics, whether it is in the carbon dating I talked to you from these places, whether it is in the Indian text that is talking about these things. Clearly, we have got enormous evidence for the antiquity of the Indian civilization.
Thank you,
Doctor, we have just two more questions to go. One by Mr. Tejas and one by Mr. Ramesh.
Namaste,
Welcome,
Ramesh.
Ramesh Swamiji.
Ramesh, you're on mute actually.
Yeah. Namaste, Raj. How are you?
I'm very fine, thank you.
So, I just wanted to come back to what you just said about the Iron Age, right? I mean, maybe a couple of days ago, there was a news item that they found some iron in tools in Tamil Nadu about 4,200 and change years ago, dated. So they had this carbon dated again. So it says it's about 2100 BCE, 2200 BCE rather,
Right.
2172 to be exact. So it's fascinating that these are all tools. There's just not so metallurgy was pretty much in an advanced level in 2172 BCE in Tamil Nadu. I mean, so this, as you said, the whole Aryan thing is all complete nonsense, as you said. Total. I mean, I don't know. This came into what? AIT came into place only in what? In the 17th century or 18th century?
1800s onwards gained currency, and
how
now
do
it is
you
fortified.
balloon up and say, oh, AIT happened, which is total nonsense. I mean, there is no evidence based on. There is no evidence. Somebody said, and this AIT is only concentrated in the south, right? I mean, they just wanted to differentiate themselves. This AIT is not accepted widely in the north of India.
Right.
Because so if you date even on like tools like like these kind of tools that were in 21 or 2200 BCE, I mean, where is this thing? I mean, so the India, would you say that it's a far more advanced, earlier civilization than what people give credit to today?
Absolutely. So I'm not surprised at all. In Mailadurai, I think the place was Mailadurai where they found these iron tools.
Correct, Mailadurai.
I'm not surprised at all. Because in southern India, we had uruk. Uruk is another word for melt, where they used to make the steel and other things. And so the technology was certainly there with ancient Indians on making iron. And again, not surprising because, like I told earlier, Karnataka is a place where iron ore wasn't plentiful. Kolar is a place where gold was plentiful. So we had mineral-rich southern India where minerals were got and metals were explored. So not at all surprising to me that this technology has moved from the south to the north, completely invalidating the notion that iron came from northwest India and propagated southwards. So that is nonsense. So we can show otherwise over here. So I expect these things to continue in the future. For example, in Adi Chanalur, the British have noted that in the urn burials, they used to bury them in urns over there. They have found evidence of the trident made out of iron, going back to almost 1500 BCE. Of course, it's later than 2200 BC, but the trident is associated with Shiva. So we are finding that there is Hindu worship going back in Adi Chanalur, Tamil Nadu, going back to an ancient period of time. The British are talking about finding skeletons in samadhi position, a yogic samadhi position. Such kind of things have been found over there. How is it that yoga is there now I'm talking about almost 2000 BC? How is it that is there in such an ancient period of time in Tamil Nadu? If the Aryans came with Hinduism 1500 BC, drove the Harappans to the south 500 BC, then imposed the caste system on them, how is it possible that 2000 BC is already yoga, already Shiva worship, already all these things happening in south? So clearly there is a lot of nonsense.
Yeah, one interesting question, because this gets asked a lot, is about the skin color. I mean, why is it dark in the south, light in the north?
Yes.
And so, see, that proves that. I mean, one of the other so-called, their data is, Aryans are white and Dravidians are not, So what do you say to that? I mean, it's skin, and Dr. Swami normally explains it's just pigmentation, right? I mean, at the end of the day, darker skin, less light, and so your skin adapts, your body adapts. It's a mutation.
So today we know genetically there are several alleles. Alleles are minor mutations where base pairs can change slightly. They've identified several of them, but one of them is SLC24A5. If I'm not mistaken, that is the correct one. So they say this mutation came about 25,000 years ago in the vicinity of India and Iran is where this mutation came. And along with the early genetic migrations went out to other parts of the world. It is there in northern Indians as well as in southern Indians. It is there in the 15th chromosome of the human body. It controls the expression of melanin. And melanin takes on the tone that we see depending on the radiant energy we get. If you live in southern latitudes, it's direct energy from sunlight, you get a darker hue. If you go to northern latitudes, it's more Uttaranchal, Himachal Pradesh, and places like that, slanted rays, you are of a much more fairer tone. So this is what it is, rather than this discredited racial notion. Race is a spurious concept. If anybody talks to you about race, stop them right there, because you must ask them, what is race? You define it in genetic terms, and I'll try to understand what race is. There is no such thing. It comes from this biblical notion of Noah's sons, Japheth, Shem, and Ham. That is where they believe the racial theory and all this nonsense came about. So no Indian should accept a debate on the basis of race or on the basis of caste. These are alien concepts for us. We don't know what that is. If we talk about Jati Varna, we can have a conversation. If you talk about at the level of genetic analysis, we can talk about color differences and so on. If you are willing to say these genetic mutations comprise this race, then okay, this is your opinion, and we can start having a discussion based on that. But otherwise, we cannot discuss what race is. That's a spurious notion over here. So in so-called Dravidians having dark skin, it is because we are in the southern part of India. There is more of direct sunlight, and we acquire the stone. And in the northern part of India, it's different. And we know that. For example, the famous from Karnataka, Dr. Rajkumar, he was kidnapped by Veerappan. Rajkumar is a very fair man. Generally, he's a very, very fair man. But after living in the jungle with Veerappan outdoors for about 3-4 months, he had got a very, very dark tone. When he was released, we saw the pictures. He was a very, very dark person at that point. So it's common sense knowledge for us that if you're exposed to sunlight for a long period of time, you will acquire a darker tone. That is it. There's nothing more to it. So the whole notion of race on the basis of color is curious.
One of the questions some of the viewers, very interesting that I've been watching this, is why isn't the level of scholarship that you sitting in the US have gained, why is that not being actively followed in India? Or does it exist, or it's being suppressed? Essentially, why are there not enough scholars in India fighting this?
So I don't know the good answer to that, Rameshji. I don't know good answer to that. But I feel that if you are living constantly in the message of media, constantly in the textbooks, constantly message in the politics saying that Dravidians, that this, you tend to internalize some of these things, or you're afraid to voice that opinion more strongly. In the academia, just yesterday, I talked to a group of academics who said, in academia today, we are where Soviet Union was. We are afraid to talk. There's an academic who told me yesterday, I'm not going to say any names or where they were, but an academic told me that in the classrooms today, the Marxists and socialists can plant somebody who can go and complain about the teacher that they're discriminated on the basis of caste and so on. And there can be a witch hunt on that academic, and it can be thrown out. So they don't like you. There's so many ways today to try to get you out of the picture. So there is literally a witch hunt going on today on the basis of these notions. So academia's voices are silenced. Even if there are intellectuals over there who know these things, they're not voicing their opinion because of the fear. This is their livelihood. I can't blame them. If they have to pay their mortgage and their other money through the salaries they're getting, how can you ask them to endanger that for the basis of the truth? They're not going to do that. In India, it is exactly the same. People are afraid of voicing their opinion. I am in a lucky situation where my bread and butter does not come from academia. I work in industry, and I'm able to voice these opinions with no fear of repercussion from academia on this. So I hope more engineers in India will take up this task, who are logical, analytical, rational, able to evaluate the evidence, able to understand science, the ones who should come out there and address these things, publish more, and challenge the social sciences people in the nonsense they're talking about.
Tejas, you had a question?
Yeah, so Raj Vedamji, like your research clearly shows that your information is completely like it's different from the textbooks or the normal government accounts of our identity. Like too many people are alienated from the Indian civilization because of such false narratives. Like, what is your opinion on what is our true identities and how do we reclaim it? Because like what steps we should actually take to reclaim our identity and history back? What do you think?
Very good question, Tejas. So in my talks, I've continuously said India has been a knowledge-based civilization. We have ample evidence for that. It's an ancient civilization that valued truth more than anything else. If you ask in a one-line statement in a Hindu, what is your goal of life? The goal of life was to dispel the avidya about your existence. Who are you? What are you? That has been the goal. Whichever sampradaya you're in, whichever text you take, it is always said, dispel the avidya about you. You are Brahman. Your ultimate identity is that. That's who you are. And in order to acquire that knowledge, you have to go to a guru or elsewhere and get that knowledge. And that knowledge comes about through the various pramanas. We have the epistemology of Indian knowledge systems as the pramanas, the various on perception, inference, logic, discussions, Shabda Pramana, and so on. We have got many, many means of admitting knowledge. So the Indian civilization for the longest time has valued the generation of knowledge. So we have been seekers. That's how you can describe the Indian civilization, that we are seekers of knowledge. We are a questioning people. All of it are question and answer, where the student is questioning the guru is answering in recursive format, and so on. So we question, we don't accept anything, we question. That is what scientists do even today, right? When somebody makes a claim, we question the claim. On what basis did you make the claim? Do you have evidence? Do you have the proof? What is your methodology? Does it follow? Do your claims follow from the methodology that you have? These are the logical questions we ask today. Guess what? Your ancestors were doing that. Your ancestors were doing that for thousands and thousands of years. In contrast to this, the Abrahamic people that we see in majority today, their goal in life is to follow the law. Whatever law has been given to Muhammad or Jesus Christ or the Gospels wrote it. So the only way to Father is through the Son. What is your goal in life? You believe in Him and He'll take your sins away for admission to heaven or eternal damnation. If you don't accept Christ, the punishment is eternal damnation in hell. You'll be burning forever and ever and ever. No redemption over there. Similarly, you follow Muhammad's sayings and you're admitted to Jannat. Otherwise, eternal damnation. Forever and ever you'll be burning in hell. So the goal in life for them is to follow. They are followers. They are not seekers. To them, knowledge does not matter. The goal of life is to follow. Be a sheep. The shepherd is over there. Follow the sheep, basically. So on this side, it has always been seeker. So you asked, what is the true nature of the Indian civilization? This is who we are. We are a nation of scientists. We are a nation of seekers of truth. We are a nation of people who are logical, rational, and trying to evaluate the evidence. We need to awaken to this reality. We have been forced into our heads that we are backward, primitive, superstitious, stagnant, because the British have told us all these things over the last 200 years, and we have come to believe this now. Connect back to the true tradition, you'll find that we are a complete civilization of knowledge seekers. That is why we have got knowledge in mathematics, we have got knowledge in astronomy, we have got knowledge in medicine, we have got knowledge in music, arts, architecture, you name it. Whichever area you take, I'll show an ancient tradition in India and a continuous building up of knowledge going into the future, all the way till the Muslims destroyed it and the Europeans destroyed it. We can show that. So your two-part question was our true nature. This is our identity. Our identity as Indians is one of a knowledge-seeking civilization, and we need to connect back to that. What do we do to get there? Today, obviously, I talked about the 5 frameworks who have distorted the message, controlling the historiography of India. They will not allow this good message to come out there, because they want to present the Indian civilization continuously as backward, primitive, destroy it. Therefore, you can get this classless utopia. That is what the socialists are doing today in India. All over politics, the laws, the constitution, everything is geared towards this goal to destroy this. This is what you're saying. So we need to overturn that. Who is going to overturn that? So I am seeing the responsibility at several levels. The first level is the individual. You as an individual have a responsibility to understand your past with evidence. You can do that in today's times by going to YouTube, seeing the talks of many thought leaders, There are many thought leaders who have given. So Professor Subhash Kak has given talks. There are Rajiv Malhotra has given talks. Several other thought leaders have given excellent talks over there. Go and read these, see these things, internalize, follow up on the references, read the books, try to understand. So the individual has a responsibility to understand their true identity and project it in their societies. If you're a parent, go to your parent-teacher association, school meeting, principal. Why is my kid studying this nonsense? The more and more people who question these things publicly, the chances that change will happen. Second, if you're an institution, if you're a group like, for example, VHS is already doing a great job, but there are many, many other organizations over there who need to realize that they have a role to play here. They have a role to invite the scholars, give them a platform, make sure the scholars' voice is amplified. So you, as office bearers over here, have a dharma over here to take this talk and other talks, amplify them. Don't be content if only 500 people have seen it, 1,000 people have seen it. How can you do every day, promote it so that thousands and millions of people can see these important talks? So you have a responsibility over there as institutions to take this message, promote the scholars, organize conferences, meet scholarly meets, and get this message out there. Get the funding for scholars who cannot afford to do research or who don't have the courage to do it. Form legal teams to protect the scholars who are attacked by the inimical ecosystems. Where is that happening in India? Today, you're left to yourself. If there's somebody who says something, they'll slap him with, you have hurt some religious feelings or some such nonsense. Who's going to his legal assistance? So we need our institutions to protect them, form the legal funds. We have social responsibility in corporates, a third level, corporates. They got the social spending, so on. So try to get those funds for building up the civilization. Try to enlighten the CEOs in these places to spend it for dharmic causes to strengthen the civilization. The fourth, the press. I needn't talk about the press today. It's populated entirely by a inimical ecosystem. But can our people get over there and present this point of view? The fifth is the government itself. The government has a responsibility to change so many bigoted laws, whether it is the right to education or whether it is the superstition, which only attacks Hinduism, by the way, or whether it is the temple worship and so on and so forth, control of temples. Many, many, many bigoted laws are in place put by the UPA government, and the present government is doing nothing to change these things. So the government has got to change. We have to go to the elected officials, hold them by the collar. I'm not saying literally, but figuratively, and ask them, why is my interest not being heard over here? When are you going to present this bill? And when are you going to change things? So try to increase awareness of people to be politically more active and make these things happen. So there's a responsibility at many levels: individual level, institutional level, corporate level, government level. Everybody's got a role to play here if you have to reclaim our heritage. It cannot be the responsibility of private scientists, citizen scientists, talking like I am talking and so on. This cannot change things. This change requires society at every level here joining hands and going to our true nature and identity, that we are knowledge seekers, have an evidence-based narration. Everywhere, push for evidence. Try to throw away the opinion-based, receive wisdom, go for evidence. So I think that is what we need to do, Tejas. And it's a long answer, but I hope I've...
Gopi, yeah, so you can conclude.
Yeah, it was pretty clear. Thank you, Raj.
Go ahead, Gopi.
Thank you, Dr. Raj Vedam ji. And we are running, ran out of the time. In fact, like overstretched too. So we almost went 10 o'clock now, 10 p.m. It's time to wind up. But there are many questions to ask. There are many clarifications to be found. But maybe we'll have one more session later sometime and clarify those things. On behalf of VHS Karnataka, I thank Dr. Raj Vedam ji for accepting our request and enlightening all of us on debunking Aryan Invasion Theory on this Samvada. Thank you, Raj Vedam ji.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to come here. It's a privilege to come on the channel. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Swamiji. I think he came for us, enlightened. We are blessed by Dr. Swami's presence and Sri Jagdish Jyoti and Ramesh ji and Sri Nikunja ji and Tejas. And last but not least, our technical team, Ishwaraya ji and Gadigi Rakesh. Thank you all. And last but not least, thank you all the wonderful viewers for making this Samvada success. Please stay safe and please do visit and register vhsindia.org for further amazing online sessions on VHS Samvada. Thank you and Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram.